Well, welcome everyone to what is our second webinar for our Smarter Legal Week. My name is Aaron Dunn and I'm joined by Chris Hill, the principal of Hill Legal. G'day, Chris. How are you?
Afternoon, Aaron, to our Eastern State viewers.
Yes, it is afternoon, and for the others on the other side of the coast, a very good morning to you. So today, our second session is about our Smarter Legal Review Service. So yesterday, we kicked off with our 7 must-haves within your SMSF deed, and the natural step around the SMSF deed is there are times where you will look at the requirements of upgrading your deeds, and you may have issues that you come across as part of an upgrade process, or even when you may take on a new client and you're starting to look at the documentation within the fund and you find areas of uncertainty or potential errors, and it needs a level or layer of legal support that is attached to that. So in respect to today's session, Chris and I are going to help unpack where that might occur and how you can then overcome some of these issues through the Smarter Legal Review Service. So just a bit of an agenda. We're going to go through, and Chris is really going to highlight some more recent cases, importantly, around where the court's views are and how they look at defective documents and why they might arise, and then what you may need to do around that, in particular, the lessons from 2 or 3 cases there. And then what it actually means around the risk for you and your clients where there are defective documents, and getting updates and things done where you may undertake legal review or where you may not actually do so. And then from there, we're going to move into a far more practical part of our session to actually talk you through the approach to how we're delivering this and actually show you how it works. And we'll do that in a couple of live documents, both in the ordering process around a number of documents that we have on the site that legal review can be requested on. So I have a deed upgrade there that I will walk you through, but then we're also going to show you where you may already have a document that is defective and you need to go through a rectification process. And again, we'll walk you through what that actually looks like. We'll also explain in some detail about the pricing and levels of review that are available, and answer a number of questions and frequently asked questions. Given that we've now had this sort of operational, Chris, it'd be fair for maybe 3 or so months. And we're, with the orders that we're seeing, just a few things we want to naturally make you aware of, and some of the stories and lessons that have been learned on both sides of the fence along the way as well. So Chris, I'm going to hand over to you here just to talk about, over these next few pages, the impact of defective documents and where we've seen these issues really get highlighted from a case law perspective as well.
Yeah, thank you, Aaron. I think it's really important to recognise that, as we discussed yesterday, that the trust deed and the terms of the trust is the engine room, so to speak, of the SMSF, and the courts look at that document. And to the extent that there are defects in the document, or if the document is missing, or if there are defects in other documents around the deed, such as deeds of appointment, that can have severe implications to the validity of the decisions of the fund, the trustee. It can impact decisions such as the validity of death benefit nominations, which can have severe consequences, particularly if a nomination is purporting to be binding or non-lapsing. And of course, we've seen a lot of cases dealing with defective nominations, and the Namuruman case, as mentioned here, is a point in where, as an example, that the courts will look at the terms of the deed. They take a very black letter trust law approach, and so it's very important that the deed follows this compliance regime of documents being intact and being correct in their form. Form very much is the case with death benefit nominations, but the procedural issues around the operation of the fund can also impact the form of the nominations or the forms created. So that has an impact not only to your members, but potentially liability issues to you and your practice. So part of this service that we're with Smarter SMSF providing is to mitigate that risk to you and your clients.
Yeah, and Chris, I think that the longer that funds have been around, and this has probably been highlighted in a lot of the work that we've done originally as well, is the longer that they're around, the more chance that there are some leaks in the system. And I use that, there's where we might have an older fund that may have an employer sponsor or a founder, and there are then some missing pieces along the way in respect to the fact that, we were just talking before we got on, where a fund had 6 or 7 updates to their deeds, because this is a fund that may have been established, in the early 2000s or even late 90s. So going back and meticulously reviewing the chain of documents is absolutely crucial here. And I think the Naruman one was actually the case in point to highlight, because where there was a gap in that one, and I think between maybe the 3rd and the 4th deed, and therefore they needed to look to remedy that, to then try and work out which deed the courts would actually try to operate, the decisions that they're going to make in respect to a range of issues from within that particular case at that time in 2018.
Yeah, and what's a little scarier when you read the Naruman case is that the court drill down through all of these documents, and they look at how each document it changes and the powers upon which the document is reviewed. So they go through a very analytical process when reviewing chains of documents, which emphasises the importance of advisors keeping documents. And of course, the issue here for many advisors is that you're going to have clients with these long deed chains, or you will inherit a client who comes to your practice with a whole history that you've not been involved in through other accountants or other advisors who have upgraded their deeds. And that is in itself a bit of a risk issue for you when you're carrying out the administration of the fund.
Yeah, and I guess to that point, as we move to the next slide, it's just, as an SMSF practitioner, you want to have some level of skill to be able to identify issues. And it's not to say that you're going to have all the answers, and to go, well, I think there may be a problem here. So therefore, if I think there is, well, how do I actually understand what that might be, and what action would I need to take off the back of that as well? So Chris, I might get you to talk a bit more specifically about the importance of some of these more recent decisions, because this then really ties into where we're heading in respect to the Smarter Legal Review Service and what we're going to be talking through today. Yeah,
and I do want to spend a little bit of time talking about these 3 cases, because there is some good news out of this, but there's some lessons for us and for our advisors about what documents they need to gather or what they should be looking for, and we'll unpack that in a moment. But these 3 cases are Victorian cases, and they're all fairly recent. But I don't believe that there are cases in other states will deviate from them. I think the principles relate to trust law principles, but of course they are Victorian cases, but they're useful to us both for practitioners in Victoria and in the other states. The Mantovani and the Olinsky case involved family trust deeds which were missing. In the Mantovani case, there was a lost family trust deed. There were properties that were held by this trust. And the court in that case said, in first instance, that because there was a missing trust deed, the trust failed for lack of certainty, because the court took the view that there was no clear and convincing proof. That was the words used by the judge at the initial trial. The case then went on appeal, and thankfully the Court of Appeal saved the missing trust deed by looking at a different test, and that is looking at what extrinsic documents are there to establish, what secondary evidence is there to establish that there was a trust deed and there was the existence of a trust. And so they looked at the affidavit material of the efforts to find extrinsic evidence, and they said, well, look, the test is not, is there clear and convincing proof, but what's on the balance of probabilities, the standard of care for a civil case, is there on the balance of probabilities, is there evidence of a trust? And they looked, both in this case and the Orlansky case, at the 3 certainties of a trust. Is there an intention, is there subject matter, and is there objects or beneficiaries. And they said, well, look, if we can find that, we will find a trust. And fortunately, the Court of Appeal saved the trust which was missing and allowed the extrinsic evidence to be admitted into evidence. And similarly with Orlansky, that was where there was a missing deed and there was a deed of confirmation of a lost trust deed. And the same approach was taken in Orlansky, that there was enough secondary evidence to establish the existence of a trust. The Elisol case is a classic case involving an SMSF where anything that can go wrong did go wrong, right? There was a missing original trust deed. There was deeds of appointment of a new trustee as to whether that was valid or invalid. There was the completion of a death benefit nomination. And so what the parties did in that case is they applied to the court for a judicial opinion as to whether these documents were valid, the deed and the change of trustee and the death benefit nomination. And fortunately, in each of those cases, the courts found that there was enough external evidence. And I think for our listeners, the key takeaway from these cases is that if you have got, and you will have this, a lost trust deed, lost pension documents, you'll have deeds of appointment or change of trustee that just don't exist or have gone missing. The courts are now showing a tendency to try and save these documents, but they will rely on extrinsic evidence. They will rely on a deed of affirmation or confirmation. And what they will do is they'll inquire and look for extrinsic evidence. And what that means is that if you do have a lost trust deed or lost pension documents, you need to find other material to be able to show that on the balance of probabilities, there was a trust deed at some point in time, or there was a pension created, or there was a pension document somewhere. And I think that's part of our process of review, is looking for that extrinsic material, which is something that we will ask of when you go to potentially a bespoke review.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know Naruman was certainly in that case as well, because I recall in that case there was a question as to whether it was a lifetime complying pension, whether it was reversionary or not, and there was no pension documents. And our lost pension deed, which affirms and confirms the pension, was built entirely off the back of that specific case. And that, I think, Chris, we did that in probably 2018-19 on the fund, on the platform, in terms of a document type to deal with situations where people can't find their pension documents. But really, the courts have been even more forthright in their views, confirming those decisions that we've seen back in the room. And in particular, when we look at the Elisol case in recent times, that it was again a decision that was put forward to try and get confirmation here as to, like you said, whether who was the right trustee, and then based upon who the right trustee was, whether the documentation that had been prepared based upon a more current deed would allow for that death benefit nomination to be valid or not in determining how the death benefits could ultimately be paid.
Yeah.
So I think the other thing here then, Chris, is looking at how these arise, and what we see from the different cases is that we do end up with defects that can be what are simple but common. But if we don't actually look to remedy these, then we know that we end up in the camp that we've just seen in some of those particular cases. So I might get you to walk through here what are some of the more common ways in which these defects arise, looking at obviously here that the sort of the typographical errors that we see, and then probably more important about the importance of procedure.
Yeah. So yeah, the errors that we've seen and that advisors will typically experience will, apart from lost documents, we're talking about existing documents, will be in these two categories, typographical and procedural. In the typographical, we're talking about documents that are not dated, incorrect reference in LRBA documents to property, non-dated documents, incorrect reference to the trustee of the fund. That's a very common issue. Especially with bare trust, they'll have the the trustee of the bare trust referenced incorrectly, for example. So these are common errors that are capable of being rectified under the doctrine of rectification. And then we have the procedural errors that arise from the decision-making, so the appointment or retirement of a trustee, whether that requires the member's consent, whether it requires the consent of a guardian or an employer sponsor, the things that are built into the deed as a prerequisite to the change or of a trustee, whether the trustee can resign or has to be removed, for example. So these are procedural errors that we pick up that can be capable of being rectified. But just as a general comment, the doctrine of rectification works on the presumption of regularity. That is, it's presumed that things are following a natural course unless proven otherwise. But rectification will only correct errors that reflect the common intention of the parties at the time the document was created. That is just a clerical error. It won't fix an error that was the wrong intention. So we often see that water muddied in some scenarios where advisors will decide, oh, I should have done this transaction a bit differently. The rectification can be abused in that situation. We have to be mindful of that. But essentially, we're just talking about, in the case of the legal reviews and the scoped reviews, basic errors in documents around typing names or descriptions.
Yep. And then the other one, Chris, is obviously the one that gets a lot more attention, which is around binding death benefit nominations. And I know we spent a bit of time yesterday talking about Rule 11 within the Smarter SMSF deed, and in particular, one of those 7 must-haves was around the fact that some deeds kind of import Regulation 6.17A around the requirements of what a binding nomination may need from a CIS Act and CIS regulation point of view. And Hill and Zuda, and as we've seen with the ATO, it really confirmed that what is in your deed must be followed when it comes to binding nominations. So again, this is quite a significant area of risk, and therefore the ability to seek guidance here becomes really important.
Yeah, and some nominations, or according to some trust deeds, require the consent of the trustee or has to be received by the trustee. That's not the case with our deed, but some deeds do provide that. And of course, if you don't have the correct trustee being appointed, you could naturally invalidate the nomination if that's a requirement of the deed. So yes, form is very, as we said at the beginning, the courts follow a black letter approach, and it's about form rather than substance, you know, that unfortunately is very critical and very important.
Yeah. And then the other area, I think, which is really important here is then the context of risk management internally. So we've obviously spoken to the fact that we need to look at management of risk with our clients' affairs, and in particular as they get older, with succession-based issues. And again, we spoke to the incapacity, and we spoke to the payment of death benefits through nominations and the like yesterday. But I'm interested, Chris, here about, because we've had a lot of discussion and debate around this area in particular for what is our members and our users, about the fact that when preparing certain documents via the platform, what level of risk is being taken and how do you best manage that risk as well? So it is a common question that we get via Smarter SMSF in terms of who prepares these documents? What risk am I carrying if I'm preparing these on the site? So I'm really interested in you sharing some of the insights and discussions we've had over some period of time, but more importantly, I guess, in the introduction of this Smarter Legal Review service. Yeah,
and I think risk can materialize on different levels and in different areas. I suppose at the basic level is the question, this is a legal document, I'm providing it to a client, am I, giving legal advice when I give the client this document? And essentially, if you're producing a document, you're essentially holding out that this document is fit for its intended purpose, even though you're not providing legal advice. But there are areas where you know, in providing certain documents, you ought to have some sort of legal sign-off, because we support the document, we support the legal document that is being presented, and it's a level of comfort to advisors to be able to have that legal sign-off if there is that level of concern, particularly if a document is being used in the context of a transaction, as opposed to just being used as like an establishment deed. An LRBA is a classic case of the document being brought into a transaction. Is it appropriate? Is it necessary? And there is that risk of some liability if you are using the document in the context of a client transaction. So it provides, legal sign-off provides that level of comfort to you, you know, around the use of the document. And of course, the other layer of risk is the errors that it might exist in documents that could come back to bite you, you know, and the consequences of an error flowing through to, as we said, a death benefit nomination or a trustee decision to establish exercise a power in relation to an investment strategy. If there are those defects, then the legal sign-off will provide you with a level of comfort, because we essentially are taking that responsibility after we review the documents within the scope of that review, right? So this is really about giving advisors comfort. I think it's also about being proactive with your clients to look for problems before they arise, right? And to recognise that if there is a problem in this jurisdiction, it ends up in the Supreme Court. We don't have, as we said yesterday, the Superannuation Complaints Tribunal or cost-effective process to resolve it. We do have, of course, in our deed, the dispute resolution process, but any form of resolution to a problem is going to be more expensive than fixing it through a legal review process on any view.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've started to put together a range of FAQs as well. I might just quickly jump across to that on the website, if I can find that quickly. So I need to actually get, no, that's not, where's the slides? Where's the page I'm after? Never there when you want it. There it is, right there. So what we've got in here is we've started to build out a range of frequently asked questions, and we'll have a talk to these a little bit later. But if you've got questions and you're looking at wanting to sort of find out a little bit more about, well, what do I get as part of the process, or how does it work, or why may it be beneficial, there's a number of things in here that we're starting to build out based upon the questions that we get regularly as part of this particular process as well. So not only do we have on the site under the documents, our legal review page, you can see here that talks about the pricing. And again, we'll come back to that. We're starting to build out a number of these FAQs to help you understand and get some called it level 1 support around some of the things that we are regularly seeing from those that are utilizing the service as well. So let's keep moving on. And I want to, I guess, talk to the relationship. And many of you will have seen Chris and I talk together on a number of topics now over the past couple of years. But it is important to recognise that at Smarter SMSF, we have made a chosen decision to have Hill Legal appointed as our legal partner. And that's not only in the context of the Smarter Legal Review, it's the fact that Chris and I have been doing work together since the fact that we did a whole range of updates with Ian Glenister to rebuild the SMSF deed in respect to the 2017 reforms. And I know, Chris, you've been working specifically with Ian Glenister, now retired since sort of the mid-2007s when LRBAs were sort of kicking off at that point in time as well. So it is a long-standing relationship, but it's a relationship that we needed to, I guess, more formally establish as, like I said, Ian sort of moved out of the legal officer role that he had within the practice. And I guess as the opportunity has presented, we've spent more and more time enhancing what the relationship looks like. So not only Chris and I sort of regularly talk and bounce things off each other, we're actively looking at the rules within the deed and the constitution, making the updates where necessary, not only to that document, but to a range of documents as well that really leverage the opportunities that we see within the superannuation laws that can then be constructed out of the deed. So, Chris, I don't know if you kind of want to add anything further to that before we get stuck into the more practical side of today's session.
Well, I think the key point is, and I think you've touched on it, is that we see the provisions in the deed as a way that you can develop strategies for your clients and add more value to your clients. Rather than just have a trust deed that just has a bunch of rules, what we're doing is with the deed is providing opportunities for you to develop strategies. And tomorrow's discussion on the SMSF enduring power of attorney will be one of those areas where you can add a lot of value that you can only provide with the use of the Smarter SMSF deed. But yeah, I think it's taking a pragmatic approach to the legal side of the document, which is what I enjoy. I've had a financial planning background as well as a legal background. And so, it's about how do we use legal documents and legal solutions with real practical outcomes.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, let's get stuck into the approach and obviously how this all works. And as we've really highlighted so far, the approach to this is all about providing peace of mind to the client, that the client knows that what they have and what they've paid for ultimately will achieve the outcomes that they want to obtain, having obtained that advice from you and a range of other professionals that they might be dealing with at that time. It's also then becomes peace of mind for you as the advisor in that trusted role to ensure that what you also have and have been guiding your clients on will also stack up if it ever came to fruition in a court of law. So the fact that we have Hill Legal sitting here that allows that peace of mind to be achieved by underpinning legal review, we see as an important part to the overall solution here in providing, I said, not only our members, but those of you that use the platform regularly as well. So the process is all about looking at the document that is potentially being ordered and the chain that obviously sits behind that, identifying whether there is any unbroken links in that chain to allow that to be fixed as well, and whether that needs to go through rectification or some sort of confirmation or adoption that may be relevant in those circumstances. And I guess, Chris, the final one here is that sometimes things can be so broken that we therefore might need to look at an alternate solution. And I'm sure you've come across some of these sort of cases themselves. And ultimately, as part of the scoping of this work, there will be situations where the advice may come back to be, this might be a little bit too far gone, therefore we may need to look at an alternate course of action. Yeah,
and obviously one of those is possibly rolling out into another SMSF if that's the right solution for you and your clients. The other thing I just want to add while we're on this slide is the importance of doing the review now before your fund gets to audit stage, right? Because you don't want a qualified audit. And so part of this process we would suggest is getting your fund's affairs up to date. And I've had a lot of interactions with auditors, and sometimes they don't know what to do. We suggest a solution, which is a deed of rectification, and they just say, yep, we'll take that on. And so I think if you show the initiative before the fund gets to audit, you're going to have less problems down the track with than the auditor finding issues and then coming back to us to try and cure it. The process will be a lot more streamlined, I think.
Absolutely. So let's get stuck in it. So we've got a couple of things here. First, diagrammatically, and then we're going to jump into some of the forms and show you as well. So across a number of our legal documents now on our Smarter SMSF platform, and I use the word there, our Docs 2.0 platform, which is currently in beta. We're building this out in the new platform rather than with the old documents there. You do have the ability when you look at a particular form, and I'll just use a deed upgrade here for simplicity. You have the option to go, yes, I wish to have legal review, or no, I don't, as you can see on the bottom of the screen. And then if on the basis that we choose not to request any legal review, then ultimately the exact same process occurs that is currently applying when you order documents. That is, you will review and then you'll submit that order and the document will generate. If you're PAYG, you pay for that. If you have a subscription, it will deduct it off the counters. But if you want to request legal review, then ultimately you can do that. And what we then have is a number of levels of review, and we'll talk to the scoping a little bit more later on and the pricing that sits with that. But ultimately, we select a level of review that needs to occur. So that may be something that's quite simple, a scope review. So it may be that we've got an original deed and we may have had one update, for example. But I think, Chris, you said the other day, there was one that was submitted and it might have thought it been only 1 or 2 deeds there ended up actually being 7. And then there was something else. I think he said there was an employer sponsor in there at some point, and then it had been missed. So quite clearly there is, as part of this process, a scoping that needs to be done not only by you in submitting it, but Hill Legal will obviously undertake some level of scoping themselves to make sure that it ultimately fits in the right bucket when that work needs to be done. Now, as part of that process, you'll be able to upload the relevant documents here. And again, Hill Legal will have to review those documents and then scope that in their own right to make sure that what you have indicated is either factually correct or there may be some additional information that they need to get. There is an opportunity for you to submit some more information. So I guess just a bit of a free form comments area. And then you will submit that off to the Smarter SMSF platform for the legal review to be undertaken. So the important step here is that the order will not generate, but it will then go for review. Okay, so that is an important step there. And the next thing that you'll see on the screen is that when that has been requested, you will end up in a situation where the submitted order will be an amber color here, as opposed to the purple, and will show that it is subject to legal review. Okay, so Hill Legal will then go and actually look to that particular document and undertake that initial review. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump over to the site here and actually sort of walk you through what this looks like. So I've just got a saved order here. So I have a deed of variation. I've sort of prepared some of this earlier just to save a bit of time as part of this process. So what we have is our standard order form that you can see here for a trust deed upgrade. We've got all the relevant information that we actually need in respect to the members and the trustee and this sort of stuff. So then what you can see here is we have this selection of whether we want to request legal review or not. Okay, so if on the basis that we select yes, then we are deciding what level of review needs to occur. Okay, and we need to refer to the legal review and the scoping to find out what one may be relevant. If it changes, and I guess we forewarned you that it may change, you're going to hear from Chris and his team in respect to what that change is and why that change will occur. So if you have paid an amount already, there will be an adjustment to the final invoice that would be received. So very simply, I'm just going to make this fairly simple, that if you had selected scoped review for some reason and paid $330 for that to occur, there was then additional work that needed to be done that increased that fee to $550, let's say, then you would be advised of that first. Hill Legal will invoice you for the additional $220, and then between Smarter SMSF and Hill Legal, we are then responsible for the $330 additional that has been paid. Okay, so just to be clear, that's the approach in respect to how this works. Subject to whether you are a member. If you are a member, you would be required to pay for that level of legal review as part of the ordering process here. If you're ordering documents on a pay-as-you-go basis, you will pay both the document fee and the scoped review fee, or the review, whatever review fee it is at that point in time. Now, if you already know it's going to be a bespoke review, we don't charge you at this point. You are basically handing everything over to Hill Legal, and Hill Legal will work through the documents there and ultimately come back to you with the quote that needs to occur. Now, the expectation here is as well that you will be uploading files into here. So it may be the original establishment, the deed upgrade in this instance. So where we're saying that there has been an initial upgrade that was done. And then ultimately we have in here the legal review, any additional information. Again, you can insert information into here, and then you will acknowledge that Hill Legal will be the one that will conduct that review. And then you understand that Smarter SMSF is not the one that's providing that legal advice. So you'll basically work through that particular form. You'll then be able to go through, and what am I missing in here? What's my chairperson missing? I might have to come back to that now. Bug up. So what will end up happening is we end up in a situation whereby once that has been submitted, the order, as we spoke about before, will effectively be an orange item on here. I don't know if I've got one that might, but I'll come back to it with our rectification shortly. So let's get back to the form. So we can see here, as I've mentioned on the screen, the fact that we then move from the legal review now being submitted to Hill Legal. What then happens in the background is then we're then sending that information across to Hill Legal, in which the lawyer will then confirm not only the submission of the review, but then provide an indication. And Chris, this might be, I think we say it's within 2 business days that would ordinarily occur. So what you and your team are doing is they're looking at the information that has been submitted and making an assessment based upon what has been submitted, that the scope is either correct, and therefore that would be confirmed and move on, or if the scope is somewhat out of scope, and therefore what the additional issues may be where that scope needs to change.
Yeah. And there's just 2 comments I'd like to make in relation to that for our listeners. It's very important that you provide as much information as possible. We've had the experience where someone's done a deed of variation, and we've looked at the deed of variation, and this deed is referred to 3 other variations, right? So that means we need to look at the chain of documents, not just the most recent one. So if you could look at or indicate whether you've got those documents, because that's going to be relevant as well, or if they can be located. And that will help us confirm or change the scope if that's appropriate, and of course what it's going to cost you. The second point that comes out of that is that if there's going to be a bespoke review or something outside of the scope pricing, the first thing you're going to need to decide, apart from what it's going to cost, is are you going to be engaging Hill Legal, or is your client? Are you going to be paying the fee, or is your client? Now, that you may have a policy around that in terms of the amount, but that's something that we will ask you, because as part of our engagement, we will need to be engaged by the client if your client is going to pay, and that's part of our duty and obligation under the Legal Practice Act. And it's important for you to know, what those thresholds are, or if the fee is going to be paid by your firm.
Yep, absolutely. So the other part to this then is that once that has been done, Chris, the engagement, ultimately, we are moving from the work being done on the platform to ultimately the discussion happening between you and our client, or the person that's obviously doing that on the Smarter SMSF platform. So there's not going to be any more toing and froing, in essence, between us as a conduit. Our role at Smarter SMSF is to facilitate the actual document that you are looking to order, in this instance, a trust deed upgrade, but you do want legal review. So we are, in essence, enabling that legal review to occur. Chris obviously knows the Smarter SMSF document that is being generated, and therefore he and his team will match off that occurring. So he has the most current version of the deed upgrade, for example, available. and we'll get to the point that once the scoping of that work has been completed, that Hill legal letter of sign-off is ultimately going to be provided directly to you as the user that has requested that information. So Chris, do you want to sort of add any other comments around that before we kind of step into this final stage?
Yeah, well, just to give an example, like with a death benefit nomination, our deed will recognise, or the Smarter deed will recognise that if the death benefit nomination conforms with the earlier deed, then it's binding as far as this deed. So what we're going to be looking at is, if you've done submitting a death benefit nomination for review, we will want to look at the deed that was available or relevant at the time that nomination was prepared.
Yep.
We won't need to, even if it might differ from our deed. So will give you some insight as to what you need to provide before we provide sign off.
Yeah. So you will, in essence, get from Hill Legal, once that has been done, the fact that there is a letter of legal sign-off and comfort that goes through that the review has occurred, and the effectively, you can now go to what is in essence this final stage, which then takes you back into Smarter SMSF to move that document from what is the subject to legal review, which you can see there, and then to allow for that document to be generated. Okay, so we put a hold, in essence, on that particular order that's been done. And then when you want to generate that particular order, so if I just go back a couple of screens here, it will allow you from the drop menu to now say the legal review is complete and to actually generate that particular order. So on generating that, you need to acknowledge the fact that legal sign-off has been completed. So what we then do is the entry that has been requested will timestamp that has actually occurred and that you have acknowledged that process has been completed. And then what happens from there is that amber tab ultimately goes back to the completed, the purple actions tab, and will allow you to do the relevant things that you would ordinarily do when a particular order has been completed. So if we go into a completed orders here, what you'll then see, as I was showing before, on the completed orders page, is that you would then have the ability to then go in and download that document like you would ordinarily do so. So that is, in essence, the process that we have around the actual ordering of, and again, there are a number of documents that we have this available for within the Smarter SMSF platform at the moment. So we do have it available for our trust deed upgrades. We do have it available for changes of trustee. You can also request that with binding death benefit nominations, LRBAs, and our members fund guardian, which we're naturally going to be talking about in more detail in Thursday's session. We've got a number of other documents that we're still sort of adding onto the system, but effectively we will get to a point where most of the legal documents that we have available will enable you to choose and have that as an overall process. So a quick question here, Sharif has asked, is part of the review cost preparation of BDBN? So I think if you do request legal review in respect to a binding death benefit nomination, the cost of that review will sit in the form, just like I was showing before in the trust deed upgrade. So there will be, again, subject to membership, it will deduct off the counter, but any legal review and the level of scope that's required will then be added in as part of that particular process. So Chris, I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to add to that question, but ultimately all of these sort of forms are designed to scope out the level of legal review that you want. Hill Legal will review that in their own right, and then naturally go through and provide that legal letter of comfort and sign off as part of that overall process.
I think, as the name suggests, we're just reviewing documents. We might be creating documents with a deed of rectification or a bespoke review, but in the first, two review levels, we're just reviewing the document in relation to the deed.
Yep.
Just want to add also that in relation to the letter, the sign-off letter, it's really, really important from the point of view of our liability and the utility of the document that scope, that sign-off relates to the scope. So and therefore it's important for you when you're completing the application form, if you want to change the scope or if you want to ask us questions about how that document might sit inside a transaction that I mentioned earlier, then you need to put it in there, because the sign-off will be limited otherwise to that scope. All right. Yep. And that affects whether it's a bespoke review and the cost of the review.
Yes, I would say as accountants and advisors and the like online today, you would be full aware of how scope works and how some clients like to take advantage of scope creep in many instances. So this is obviously very similar itself. So the scope under which the request is being undertaken is naturally the scope in which Hill Legal is going to be providing that level of legal comfort. And I guess, Chris, you made a really important comment just there before around the fact that it is a legal letter of comfort in respect to that work that's been done, but it might not be the end of the road, because as part of that review, there is recognition of a potential issue that then needs to be remedied. So we do have situations whereby a person may be going through this approach and they know that there's a problem and want to get that problem fixed, but equally they might not be aware of a problem that only gets highlighted once the work has started to get underway. And you've certainly seen that to be the case as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So what we're looking for, if advisors are not, is for problems that need to be fixed. So It's a bit like going to your doctor and the doctor says, well, you've got a twisted bowel and you need an operation or whatever. We're looking for a problem that can be fixed. And that then impacts on the scope. And that might be, as we see here, a deed of rectification.
Yeah, so there's a number of ways in which a number of documents that rectification would apply, and we've got some examples on here, but there are also situations, and Chris spoke about this earlier, where we might just want to be confirming or adopting an approach. And again, it may be a missing deed or parts of a deed. Pension documents is another area as well that we had highlighted as well. So from a procedural point, from a rectification process, we now have a specific form on the system that enables you to undertake that specific deed of rectification request. So again, we have in here what we call simple rectification. So it's our level 3 review. So it is looking at all those things that we spoke about at the beginning of today's session, things like typographical errors, missing information, errors in process. So all of this then ultimately gets sent through to Hill Legal. And again, there's a level of scoping that needs to be undertaken in respect to that. And Hill Legal will then deal with you, the user, in respect to the scope of that particular work as well. And then from that approach, there will be the preparation of that relevant document, legal document that needs to be prepared based on the information that has been done. So from Smarter SMSF's point of view, we are simply submitting the information around that deed of rectification request. And again, we'd end up in this amber ordering process until the legal review process has been completed. So the key difference here is we're not producing any documentation on the site. This is simply a traffic light system to ultimately say that the request has been done. And then once that has been completed, you would acknowledge that that has been done on the site and it would move to purple. So there's no particular order that is being done in here. Hill Legal is the one that's going to be sending that to you. So I'm going to jump back into the site here, and I'm going to go across to our saved orders again, and we'll go into our actual deed of rectification, because this is a specific document that we have created here that you can see under the create area. And what it allows you to do is to go through, put in the information, and then choose the relevant document. So we've got some common documents that may need rectification. If not, put other, and then indicate what that other one is. So I'm going to say it's a deed of variation. And then we have in here the ability for you to tick one or more of these boxes around what error has occurred. So in this instance, if we're saying it's a typographical error, we can then choose if it's a name error, a date error, an incorrect entity or trustee, or incorrect address. So in that situation, if we just choose that it's an error in dating, so there might have been some ones that got muddled up, we put in those relevant dates, and then it will allow us to add additional information. In here, we've also got missing information. So maybe the deed was actually undated. What date should it have been signed? So if we take it back to, let's say, the 1st of the 10th, 15. And then there's a process error. And the process was that we had a party that was incorrectly added. So we had the Smarter Legal Week Employer Sponsor Proprietary Limited. And this is where this box of information becomes really important, as Chris was highlighting before as well, because the previous deed was incorrectly dated and included an old employer sponsor who had previously been removed. Okay, so again, Chris and his team will be then fully aware of what they need to be initially looking for. And then naturally, they're going to be having a look at some other aspects as part of the approach. There's a requirement again to upload the relevant documents that are there. So again, that would allow us to work through all of the questions that we have here. And then ultimately, we go in and we need to populate the information, the other information about the fund. So in the rectification document, Hill Legal's got all of the additional information they need about the fund and who the members are and who the trustee is, and so on and so forth. We have our natural acknowledgements, again, that the authorizes this information to go to Hill Legal, and also that Smarter SMSF is not producing those documents. You have the ability to review that information there. As I said, payment will appear here for that rectification, that simple rectification, and then that order is ultimately processed at this point in time. So it's from here that we are then passing that information across to Hill Legal to undertake that next stage that actually needs to be done. So you will, just while that's going, I'm going to jump back into the slides again quickly just to explain what that next step looks like. So you will get a confirmation, and that confirmation will come via email to advise that you have utilized the Smarter SMSF platform to get this order done. You will then also get the confirmation from Hill Legal, like I said, within the couple of business days, confirming that that submission has been undertaken. And they'll also confirm the scope of that work that needs to be done as well. So you will get those different steps as part of the process. And then if I jump back into the site here, you will see it does say the legal review. Our amber button's gone to grey here, but ultimately we have legal review completed. And as I touched on before, you will be required to complete that disclaimer as part of the process as well. So let's kind of take this to its conclusion for today, given that we do have about 4 or 5 minutes left. So Chris, I might just get you to highlight some of the ways in which we've scoped these different levels of review, because levels 1 and 2 specifically relate to the SMSF documents that are ordered on the site. So a deed upgrade, a change of trustee, that sort of thing. And then it naturally flows over to level 4, as opposed to level 3, which is really covering that rectification document that we were just working through then.
Yeah, so the scoped, the level 1 review and the pricing, as advisors would appreciate, is designed for basic reviews of documents. So in this level 1 review, we're only reviewing one legal document. So maybe a trust deed upgrade from a previous deed. Advisors might be not sure whether the deed has to be upgraded in a certain way, whether it needs a consent or there's a different process and they're not sure about the process and they want that comfort that it's upgraded accurately. That would be a level 1 review. The level 2 review is where we're carrying out more of a comprehensive review of up to 3 documents, right? So if there's more than 3 documents in a chain, then that's going to be a bespoke review, because there may be other issues in that chain that we need to review. And of course, then we've got the level 3 rectification review. I think for our advisors, it's really important that if they send us a bunch of documents for a comprehensive review, it might be that after doing that review, we need to do a rectification. So there will be an additional cost to that process. If you know that, and you might want, and that just gives you a comprehensive review with a rectification deed. If you know that the only problem you've got is a rectification, then just send it in as a level 3 review. It'll be more cost effective. It will mean that we only need to focus on that document. But if you're not sure that the rectification is just going to be the panacea to solve your issue and there are potentially other issues, then it might start with a level 2 review and expand out of that. So we just need to be mindful that the cost of the review may change, and there will be an additional cost involved, as many would expect.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess that, again, we've tried to keep this fairly simple, so to give some level of scoping restriction, so in terms of price, but in terms of the work that needs to be done. So we do have fairly what we would call simple rectifications that come through. So someone's just gone, the client's just, they've the surname's incorrect, or the date that they had was incorrect. So there's something there that can be rectified and rectified fairly quickly, and therefore we want to be able to provide a neat, simple, cost-effective solution to remedy that and move on. But we know in this environment of SMSFs, we do have funds that have more limbs to it, which raise more and more complexity, that you may need that level of specialist work to be undertaken, and you may not know what you don't know to be able to find those things as well. And in that regard, then this service is there to be able to rely upon that expertise to assist in that process, but it may be beyond the scope of level 1 or level 2 or level 3 here. Therefore, you are engaging Hill Legal, but engaging Hill Legal to actually go and undertake the relevant work that needs to be done. And Chris and his team, again, will undertake that work, but do some initial work to help you understand what that price will look like, so that you can then obviously have a discussion with the client about that as well.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Aaron, that the classic case of a level 3 review that we see a lot of is LRBA documents. The incorrect description, or maybe there was the LRBA document was established when the property was being yet subdivided. The banks will require a bare trust deed with the correct description of the property. It might require a deed of rectification. We're seeing a lot of those at the moment. So that's an area where advisors need to be mindful of.
Yeah, and Chris, I guess the important part to note with that is the concept of that rectification is that then that document is read with the initial document. So in the LRBA that might not have any property or land detail, that then the fact that the bank requires all that means that the bank will be looking to the rectification document to be read in concert with the bare trust document that was initially prepared.
And I think the important point to recognise is that if we rectify a document, its rectification operates retrospectively. In the case of a bare trust, if we recreate another bare trust because the earlier one was defective, we may have a stamp duty issue depending on the relevant state and territory. Rectification very conveniently retrospectively rectifies the document from the time the error was created, and that preserves the document.
Yep, absolutely. All right, well, there's a couple of final FAQs here in respect to, why should I get legal review? I think we've talked about that a lot today as well. When do I need to rectify a superannuation document? Well, again, we've hopefully highlighted a lot of that information to you today. The certificate of legal review and how is it useful to me? Well, again, it's a lot of that is about risk management in your own business, and that for your clients, about having that level of comfort around the fact that Hill Legal, so an Australian legal practice, has actually gone and actually undertaken that work for you and reviewed obviously that information that gives both you and your client comfort. I know many people that we talk to at events and otherwise, one of the first questions we get is, well, do you do legal sign-off? Well, this, because it's our policy and our practice to be able to do so. Well, this allows for that certainty to occur and ultimately have Chris and his team undertake that. What can the legal review not do? I guess, Chris, I'll leave that to you to maybe provide some comment there.
Well, it can't fix problems that are unfixable.
Yes. Yeah, it's not the magic panacea, I guess, is it the magic pill that fixes everything? But again, it's the scope of the work that you do and identify that then may lead to being able to undertake certain things that may remedy that particular situation. So, and I guess rather than sort of drilling through all these, again, we've spoken about a lot of this in terms of the wrong type of review and the fact that there is a scoping scenario that really works through those things. And in respect to the payment, you do make an initial payment if it's not a bespoke review to Smarter SMSF, and then Smarter SMSF and Hill Legal deal with that legal review process and payment. But there may be, where it is outside of scope, a separate payment that would need to be made to Hill Legal as part of that process too. Chris, there is a question here as well. It says, do you update details of corporate trustees? So I'm not sure if that's, Deb's asked that in respect to whether they're just upgrades ordinarily, but there is a somewhat different process when you're doing an upgrade to a set of rules for a constitution.
Yeah. So again, we're looking at the review of an existing document. We can create one as part of a bespoke review. But part of the details of updating the details, I guess the question is, are we talking about updating it with ASIC or change of office bearers, change of shareholders? There's a whole conversation around that.
I think the question might be, well, if we're going to do a deed upgrade, and we spoke yesterday about the importance of the deed and the constitution really working hand in glove. The requirement to do a whole of replacement of the constitution is arguably a lot simpler under the Corporations Act than it would be in respect to a deed upgrade. So Deb's just jumped back in again. So corporate trustee was pre-1994 and therefore did not allow for a sole director.
Yeah.
So if we wanted to have a constitution now that would allow for a sole director, what the Corporations Act would allow for us to do a whole of replacement of the Constitution's rules.
Yeah, under Section 136 of the Corporations Act, we can adopt or change the Constitution, and we can do that through minutes and resolutions. So that's very conveniently done. We can create, and I think we've done this before. One of your advisors created a new Constitution through the platform. We created the relevant minutes and resolutions to adopt that Constitution so that it could conform with the deed, certainly with the change of deed. I just want to add a comment here that I think that is probably useful. Obviously, we're reviewing documents, but as I said earlier, for some advisors, the risk is not the document, but its use, right? It's context, maybe in relation to a transaction, relating to a related party. So part of this bespoke review process can be not just looking at the veracity of the document, but its application to a transaction. So that's something that advisors may want to consider if there's some uncertainty about the document that's being created for a client, particularly where there's a related party involved.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that takes us to the end of today. So from a takeaways today, hopefully that's given you some real insight into how you can utilize the Smarter Legal Review, both in the context of a number of legal documents that we have available on the platform that you may be utilizing, again, either as part of a subscription or whether it's ordering on a pay-as-you-go basis. So it is designed for those that want that level of legal assurity behind some of those, whether it's a change of trustee, a binding death benefit nomination, a deed upgrade, and the like. But we also have the ability to support you to rectify defective documents due to a number of simple sort of errors, whether it be typographical, missing information, or even via procedural error. And we've done it in a way where we want to streamline the approach for you. So the way in which we need to make it as efficient and as therefore as cost effective is to put this in a way that we can get that information put into the system and have that given to Hill Legal to allow them to scope out that as quickly as they possibly can and come back to you and confirm that that is either on scope, or there may be some other issues that need to be contemplated that may need to adjust that scope. But the idea here is we want to encourage you to use this as much as we possibly can. And the way in which we've built this, we believe, is a little bit unique in the marketplace, but allows for it to be done competitively and ensure that we can get as prompt a turnaround times as we possibly can as well. So that pretty much takes us to the end of today. Thank you, Chris, for joining me once again.
Right.
We do have 2 more sessions scheduled for the rest of this week. So tomorrow we are looking at creating SMSF powers of attorney. Chris has done some amazing work with his Inherit Australia business. So we're going to be showcasing that tomorrow and how you can access that from within the Smarter SMSF platform. And you would have heard us talking about yesterday, if you're in our session on the 7 must-haves of a SMSF deed, the concept of a fund guardian. So we're going to be talking about that on Thursday as well. And if you want to find out more, we do have an upcoming SMSF Pensions Masterclass at the end of August. All of the details you can find on the Smarter SMSF website. So thank you once again for joining us for today. Thanks for hanging around. We're just a little bit over time. We look forward to seeing you for the rest of our sessions throughout Smarter Legal Week. Take care and bye for now.
Thank you.